I have often said empathy is maybe my core guiding principle. But now I'm starting to think maybe it's not. Maybe empathy is like in service to some of those other guiding principles, like wisdom or courage. I'm Trisha Taylor.
And I'm Michael DeRuyter, and this is the Leader's Journey podcast. So this is a podcast part of our series on guiding principles that we've been talking about. And I think it's really interesting, not just guiding principles in general, but thinking about maybe some specific guiding principles that people can try on, right? And decide, is this something to incorporate into my life in the way that I function and live? And so I think so far in this series, we've talked about integrity and resilience and welcome. And today we add to that list the topic of empathy, the idea of empathy as a guiding principle.
And just in case, everybody really enjoys this podcast, they can come back and be with us on October 21st at 1. That's Central Time. Everybody can figure out their own time zone. But you and I will show up on Zoom for about 45 minutes to just have a conversation about the things that we're talking about here. So if people are saying, yeah, but they can come on October 21st. And it's not a webinar, just to be clear, where you just show up and listen to Mike and I talk. It is an actual dialogue. You don't have to talk, but you're invited to talk. And so we hope maybe you'll join us there. But to continue in the series on guiding principles, I think it might be helpful to just say, what's the definition we've been using? Yeah. And that's this, that guiding principles are those bright stars that we navigate our lives by. They are those deeply held values, those fundamental commitments, some that maybe we're readily aware of, some that maybe we're not, that we reach for when those togetherness forces maybe get so strong and threaten to pull us away from who we want to be.
So, and so they're actionable, right? I mean, they're like verbs. And the way I think about it is like, this is something that I can do when the pressure is on, right? This is something that gives me some alternative courses of action.
Yes. And so then the idea of empathy, that's a great place to start, that this is not intended to be some kind of cerebral conversation about some core value that we should, value, but rather this is a conversation about a way of showing up, maybe a way of thinking, and then a way of acting. And so, I wanted us to talk about empathy for a couple of reasons. One is, I'll just go ahead and tell you, my coach told me that my superpower is exquisite empathy. So obviously, and she didn't entirely mean that positively, which but also just that it's kind of in the conversation that we're having these days. Everybody seems to have an opinion about empathy. We started with Brené Brown, a few years ago. And I will say, my friend Pam and I, we're here in Houston. She's in Houston. Before she ever even had a book out, my friend Pam and I were stalking her, going to like PTA meetings and stuff like that, just to hear her talk about empathy. So it goes a long way for me. But then beyond Brené Brown, we're having these conversations about maybe empathy isn't a good thing.
Yeah. Right. In the political realm, and sometimes in very conservative theological realms, right? People like even Doug Wilson have said things, floated the idea that empathy is a sin, right? And to elevate it to, right, it's not just problematic, but it's sinful, right? That's a really loaded statement.
Yeah. I saw an author the other day. I'll have her name in the show notes. Said that empathy is if it's not a sin, it's the thing that makes us condone sin, and therefore it's dangerous.
Yeah.
but I think she thought it was a sin. So
Yeah. Right. I mean, the idea is that somehow, if we are being empathetic, we get disconnected from what some people might describe as capital T truth. Like we're going to sacrifice objectivity and we're going to sacrifice truth on the altar of feelings, right? And sort of this empathetic wallowing with somebody, right?
Ooh, yeah, that I want to just stay there for a minute. That is one of the very common assumptions.
Yeah.
And use that word wallow. That's a good word.
Yeah.
What people imagine.
Yeah.
In a leadership space, when I talk about empathy, someone, usually a manager of some kind, will always say something like, "Yeah, but what about accountability?" Like the assumption is that if I'm pro empathy, I must be anti accountability. Maybe same kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that gets at, I think there is a problem with empathy. And part of the problem with empathy, I think, is that it gets defined in so many different ways, right? We don't have a clear sort of definition, right? And so a lot of these conversations, I think we're talking past one another. We have assumptions built into that space. And I was reading one social psychologist recently who said that she had, in the literature, even the literature, right? No, these are professional sources. She came up with over 8 different definitions for empathy, right? And and then you take that into the popular culture and into our social conversations, and I would imagine there's even more than that, right? So we're not often talking about the same things.
So just to kind of talk about what we're talking about when we talk about empathy, what were some of the disparate ways that she heard empathy defined?
Yeah. So I think one of the really popular definitions was sort of like this emotional contagion, and I think that's kind of what some of these leaders are getting at, right? This sense of the effort is just to directly feel what you feel, right? So if you're angry, I'm angry. And if you're afraid, right, just to enter into the feeling of the other. And, I think there's some assumption that that's what we're aiming for. And I can see where that feels uncomfortable, right? That feels exhausting, right? That feels completely exhausting and maybe not even possible.
My mental picture of that is like I'm going to say probably like the millennial would be who says, I can't come to work today because, I'm an empath.
Yes.
In
Right.
other words, I'm feeling all these feelings, so I can't function today.
Right.
I think maybe there was a New Yorker cartoon about that at some point, but yeah, and at least that's not what I mean by empathy.
Yeah.
But it's in the space.
Yeah. Another definition that sort of came up for this person and the material that I was looking at was this idea of sort of empathy as imagination. So it's like one step removed. So you're not like entering directly into the feeling of the other person, but you're trying to imagine yourself in the place of the other person. And so I like that a little bit better. And I feel like that's sort of like the kindergarten advice of, walk a mile in this person's shoes and, can you imagine what Tommy is going through right now? And right. That sort of starts to get at it. And then this particular researcher said that some of the limitations of that though becomes that we're entering, we're making some assumptions, right? And maybe our imagination isn't accurate to what that person is really experiencing.
True.
And we can begin to treat people out of that inaccurate assumption. Or maybe we imagine that if we were in that person's shoes, we would do better. Right. And so there's this idea that, well, if I was in your place, I would be looking for a job. Right.
Yeah.
Or I would have better control over my kids than you seem to. Right. And that imagination can lead us to some places that probably we don't want to go.
I hadn't even thought
Right.
of that. The
Yeah.
first part that we can get it wrong, right? Like if I'm
Yeah.
managing someone and they're having a hard day and I think, what might they be feeling? They're probably feeling that they want space. And so
Yeah.
I give them that. I could get that really wrong, right? No,
Yeah.
maybe I would want space. They
Yeah.
may
Yeah.
wish
Right.
that their
Right.
manager
Right.
would come and talk to them about
Right.
what's happening, right?
Right.
And so,
Right.
but the idea that I might even um, yeah, that I would make assumptions about how I would do better in that situation than they are. That's really good. But the idea there is perspective taking, that at least I'm
Yeah.
trying to see
Yeah.
something from another person's point of view.
Right.
And I've heard you talk about point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. I think perspective taking um, is probably the closest definition to
Yeah.
empathy that I work with, and um, maybe we'll want to expand that a little bit, either in this conversation or next month in our conversation on Zoom. But the idea of taking a perspective, right? Sometimes people think that perspective is just trying to see things the same way.
Mm,
Um, but one of my teachers broke down perspective into two parts, right? And there's a point and a view.
mm,
And to really increase the accuracy of our perspective taking,
mm,
which, by the way, I think is a skill set that we can practice, right? So
mm.
it's not just like I'm born as an empath or I'm of a certain generation that I'm empathic, right? But I can actually grow in my
Yes.
capacity to take perspective, right?
My understanding is that it's located in the brain,
Yeah,
um, and that people who have learned how to do it in childhood are better at it as adults, but that adults can also learn. But that it is similar in the brain to being able to imagine a place on a map where you haven't been.
yeah,
It's that idea of being able to somehow shift what we're looking at internally.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
idea that there is a point and a view, um, there's just a trend, maybe the last 20 years, some of the more popular novelists will tell a story, and each chapter is told by a different character. And we get that sense of what the story looks like from the different people in
yeah,
the story.
yeah, exactly. I think separating those two pieces out just it increases the number of questions that I'm asking. It increases the curiosity that I bring to a relationship, right? So, I might be looking, a point and a view. So the coffee cup is my view
Okay.
and my eyeballs are the point, right? So I'm looking at the
Um,
coffee cup. So I have a point
um,
and a view. And
and
part of the
because
question,
we
yeah,
record on YouTube now,
yeah,
I so hey everybody, if you want to see Mike's coffee
there you
cup,
go. There you go.
that I can also see your coffee cup
That's right.
but from a very different point.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you might be focused on the empty part of the cup. And I might be, is it half full or half empty? Right. And we're looking at different views,
Yeah.
right? Are we looking at the coffee? Or are we looking at the cup?
Yeah.
What is the view that we're taking in? And then the
And literally,
point,
I can't see the coffee. You can.
that's right. That's right. That's
But
right.
literally, I can't.
That's right. Yeah. And then the point is made up of all the different mental models that filter the way we experience reality, right? So now I happen to know that I made this coffee cup, right? This was one of my early clay projects, right? So I look at that with a different point of view
Uh-huh.
than somebody who walks in and says, that is a really ugly mug, right? I was like, well, it is, but it's my first one, right?
Right. And that was not my thought.
Yeah.
But I am just really interested. I was doing a webinar with a group of leaders earlier this week, and we were talking about meaning making. And one of the things that we pointed out is that we can never see the internal experience of another person. I cannot see that. I do not have access to that. You know, I don't have access to what they might be thinking. I don't know. I can only imagine. And, there's a little bit of pushback on this idea that, well, but they're my kid. I know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
But I don't actually. And my
Yeah.
point of reference is different from their point of reference.
That's right. That's right.
Um, okay, so if empathy maybe is in part perspective taking, and I would say a really robust form of perspective taking, to be able to really get curious and also have some sense of what life might be like for another person and then to also be able to fairly accurately understand what they are experiencing.
Yeah.
And then maybe the feelings that go with that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
connected to emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
idea that we have
Yeah.
more emotional intelligence when we're mostly accurate
Yeah.
about what people might be experiencing.
Yeah.
Um,
Trisha, do you think that part of empathy is just even the desire to take perspective of another person, right? We're, to move from that sort of self-centered idea
ah,
that I personally have exclusive access to capital T truth. The way
yeah,
that I see the world is the way the world really is.
yeah,
To move into a space where I really desire to share a point of view with another person and to increase my sort of
yeah.
empathetic accuracy, right? To be able
That,
to read the experience of another person.
and maybe in part, that's part of the difference between maybe an immature empathy, which is just like, I just can't help going through the world absorbing other people's emotions,
Yeah.
and a more mature empathy, which is that this
Yeah.
is a decision I'm making, that there's value to
Yeah.
trying to step out of my own perspective
Yeah.
and see that of others. Yeah, I'm thinking to, when Andrew, our oldest, was a boy, he was home one day from school, and I had the Oprah show on, and they were doing a show on stay-at-home moms and working moms, and they had
Yeah.
the audience divided, like literally divided in the room against each other. And Andrew said very sadly, he said, "Mom, you won't ever get to go on Oprah because you always see those sides." But I mean, that I
Yeah.
felt a moment of like pride in that he could see that I thought that was valuable to be able to see
Yeah.
multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
also true that I never got to go on Oprah. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea of sort of a range of empathetic maturity,
mhm.
right? That the immature version and the more mature version.
Yeah, let's connect that conversation because this is one place I really want to dive in to the conversation in terms of family systems thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, we can think of empathy as purely togetherness forces,
Right.
and I'm willing to say evolutionarily, it probably did develop that way.
Sure.
That we raise our ability to survive in the world if we can imagine, if we can kind of take the perspective of someone else who might want to harm us,
That's
um,
right.
or who might pose a threat.
That's right.
So, but is there a way? This is my question. Is there a way to think about empathy beyond those togetherness forces?
Yeah. I think it's baked right into family systems theory itself.
Okay.
I don't think that they would use the language. In fact, I know they don't use the language of
Right.
empathy, right?
Right.
I remember doing a paper at the Georgetown Center, and I presented, and I think I had some language about empathy and forgiveness. And the room looked at me, and they were like, "Do you even know where you are? Because you should just pack up and walk out right now, because that kind of
Yeah.
language just has no place here."
Like
Um,
you cussed in church, right?
right, right, yeah. It just did not connect at all. Um, and their effort was to really work to interrupt that stuck togetherness, right? That the idea that I can choose what I want to feel. I can choose my own well-being, and that doesn't depend on your regard for me or your positive feelings towards me. Or I can have my own. I can be responsible for my own feeling. Um, and then baked into the same theory is this idea that sort of as I'm looking at my family system or I'm looking at my workplace system, I I want to gain some objectivity about that and not just make assumptions, for example, that this person is the enemy, this person was evil, this person in our family was the problem,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And part of getting to that objectivity is asking the question. Literally, Dr. Bowen would say things like, try to understand what that person was up against, right?
Mm.
What was the hand that your father was dealt?
Mm-hmm.
What are
Yeah.
the challenges that coworker is facing, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm.
that to me is exactly the language of perspective taking, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe
Mm.
it's more of a cognitive empathy that they like rather
Yeah.
than the emotional
Mm.
stuck togetherness. But I do think that work of saying in my system, what is that person up against,
Yeah.
and how can I get a little bit more nuanced and objective, right? And not just paint somebody with the broad strokes of you're the problem, you're the enemy, right?
Right.
Um,
You're on my side. I mean,
you're
also,
yeah,
right? You're a
yeah,
friend.
yeah,
You're an
yeah.
enemy.
You're for me
Twisted.
or against me. Yeah,
Uh-huh,
yeah,
exactly. That idea of cognitive empathy, I do think that's really important. And also, that happens every time I do a family diagram with a client, is that they
yeah,
start to see a different perspective
yeah,
of the people in their family. Or anytime we take, a workplace and try to diagram the functioning of the different parts of the org chart,
yeah,
things get clear
yeah.
like this.
That's right,
Um,
right.
mhm.
And so, I mean, for me, the ironic piece is that somebody who's concerned that empathy is going to erode our access to truth, right? This
Right?
sort of perspective taking helps us to recognize that we don't have the corner on truth, and we actually get a bigger picture of what is true in the world, right? We actually see something more true about our family or our congregation or our workplace when
Uh-huh.
we can take the perspective of others and appreciate what they're up against, what they're for, what they've experienced.
Yeah.
Then and our capacity for seeing truth is actually expanded and not given up.
But but going back to what you said earlier, that requires that I give up the idea that my point, the point from which I have a view,
Mm,
is capital T truth.
right.
And that's hard to give up. But empathy encourages us to do that. And then we come along, and Edwin Friedman writes an entire chapter in A Failure of Nerve about how terrible empathy is, which is an
Yeah.
overstatement. That is not actually what he says.
Yeah.
And because that was published posthumously, I hold open the possibility that he might have gone back to that chapter and said things a little differently had he lived
Yeah.
to do so. But
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
idea that I just think this is because I think what he names is an immature form
Yes.
of empathy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
you too?
I
Okay.
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
That
I think
that
he was talking about leadership,
Mhm.
um, performing a protective function for a system and
Yeah.
keeping sort of kind of the hijacking of the immature presence at bay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, he literally says it's the rationalization that we give
yeah.
our failure of nerve, our
Yes.
unwillingness to take a stand,
Yep.
to define ourselves clearly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember the first time I read that chapter, I almost threw the book across the room. I mean, I really was very reactive to that. And then someone asked me to come on a different podcast. This was about 5 years ago and talk about it. And in preparing, I had to go back and read what he
Yeah.
actually wrote.
Yeah.
And I think what he was naming was that that idea that empathy can be a symptom of fusion,
Yeah.
that it's that thing that says, so for example, if I have empathy for you, then I have to fill in the blank. I have to indulge you. I have to allow you not to take responsibility for yourself.
Right.
Maybe what I have to do is over focus on you
Right.
and lose the focus that I need to be having for myself and my own position and my
Right.
own
Right.
actions. Yeah. Does that line up with what you think?
I think that's how I read him. Yeah. And I think that's a caricature of empathy that we're not advocating that people take on as a guiding principle, right? We're
Right.
right.
Yes. But that's what we often
Yeah,
call empathy in the world,
that's right.
right? That an empathetic person is someone who is unwilling to take a stand, who is unwilling to, who is by default not taking responsibility for themselves because they are so focused on everyone else's feelings. I mean, I'm thinking about the leader who, I mean, I've been in this position, so the leader is me, but when as leaders, we have a pretty clear sense of where the organization needs to go. Maybe it's a pastor who really believes that the congregation has discerned the spirit's view, or maybe we've done a lot of work to try to determine what the next steps need to be. And then when we start to move in that direction, people get unhappy,
Yeah,
and they come to us and they
yeah,
might even cry or they
yeah,
might be angry and they
yeah,
say,
yeah,
this change is causing hardship for me and I'm in distress and you need to take care of my distress and stop going in this direction. And I think sometimes a misunderstanding of empathy is that if I have empathy for that person's distress, then that's what I have to do. I have to stop with the change and make sure they're okay first.
yeah. Right. And the complicating piece of that, I remember a board member in a meeting once literally said, the last thing we want to do is make people upset. And right. And I remember, right. And I was like, really? That's the last thing we want to do? I don't even know how that's avoidable because, right,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people will be up. I mean, right. There's a version of leading people where people will say something like, you didn't listen to me.
Mm-mm.
Right. And what that means is you didn't do what I said.
Right. Yes. Or,
Right.
or they say you were mean.
Right.
And what they mean is you didn't stop leading change to
Right.
stop and take care of my feelings.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a piece of this conversation, but that doesn't mean we have to give up our definition and practice of empathy.
Yeah. So how does a leader, I just think this is so important, whether it's a family or a workplace or a congregation, how does a leader do what, I mean, actually Friedman says that there is a third way, right? That there is, he does say later in the chapter after he made everybody mad, that there is a way to be both caring and self-defining.
Right.
That I can literally care
Yeah.
about the distress someone is in
That's right.
and also stay the course.
Yeah.
And that is tough, but that I think would be a more mature
Right.
version of empathy. I mean, I saw this growing up. My parents were so good at this that I have one specific memory where I broke like the biggest rule my parents had, which was probably not the biggest rule they should have had, but it was the biggest rule they had because
Yeah.
I was a good kid.
Yeah.
And there was lots and lots of emotion. My parents were so angry and so hurt that I'd done this. And then they gave me my punishment, which was a week. I was grounded for a week. It happened to be the week that my small town youth group was going to Six Flags. We did that once a year. It
Yeah.
was a big deal,
Right.
right? And so I went to bed that night. Everybody had been mad and crying. Got up the next day for the first day of being grounded, And my mom was really sweet to me. And there was special breakfast. And during the week, one day she said, well, hey, you're at home. Let's go to the store, get some fabric. We'll make you a skirt. And we did that together. And my dad occasionally would just kind of be nice to me. He took me to the bookstore. And we hung out more than we would have if I hadn't been grounded. And I started to think, I'm going to get to go to Six Flags, right? Look at how nice mom and dad are being to me.
Right. Looking good so far. Yeah.
It's looking good. And so then when I started to make the case, first by whining and then by getting mad that I should be able to go to Six Flags on Saturday, I ran up against kind of they had a ton of empathy for me. They were very sweet to me about how sad they were that I had to miss the trip. And I missed the trip.
Yeah.
And for me, just always stood as an example of that kind of mature empathy.
It almost, I don't remember where I heard this, but it's almost like defined and connected.
Almost, right?
Yeah, right. I don't know. I love that idea. Mature empathy gives us access to things like compassion.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And resilience.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, all of these things that are so critical for both the connection part and the leadership definition part that just I don't know how those things work without some robust version of perspective taking.
Yeah. And the willingness, the ability to understand what the impact of my leadership is and how people experience and the feelings that they feel without having to turn loose of my conviction that this is the way to go. I think we have to figure this out because I think if we don't, we tend to land on one side or the other of a polarization that either it's all about accountability and here's where we're going. And, the body's behind the bus idea, that the bus is going this way. And if you're not on board, we will run over you. Right. And we don't care.
Right.
And then on the other end, this group think that we talked about a minute ago, that if anybody is unhappy, we have to stop the bus until everybody's happy again. And then we can go. Somehow being able to address, I know this is hard and this is what we're doing. That's tricky. We were talking a little bit earlier about Doris Kearns Goodwin, but you and I both have different books of hers that we really love. And her book on leadership is a place that she talks about 4 leaders. She talks about Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, and LBJ. Mm-hmm. And she talks about how each of them, one of the things they have in common is a really deep sense of empathy for the people they led. I'm a Texan. LBJ was a well-known, I'm going to use the word jerk. Other words we could use. He was absolutely well known to have that kind. But he was almost, in many ways, exclusively motivated in some places by understanding the suffering of people in the country and what they were up against. And she says that empathy characterizes a really deep, skilled empathy characterizes each of their leadership. But then she also makes the point, they also had to sustain leadership in times of real crisis, where the empathy made them trustworthy. The empathy allowed them to kind of see the impact of the decisions that they were making. I think we could say that all 4 of them were not cruel. But then she makes the point that they also had enough ego. That was her word, but we might use different words. Yeah. They also had enough ego that they pretty much made the decisions that they thought were right and pursued them anyway. And that's just an interesting understanding of empathy for me.
Yeah. that almost starts, I mean, that brings together things like wisdom and courage in my thinking, right? That, this idea of wisdom as being able to see the bigger picture, the impact of my actions,
Mm.
the interaction between my decisions and what's happening in society or in an organization, right? That there's something about being able to take that perspective in an empathetic way that seems really valuable for a leader.
That makes me wonder. I mean, I have often said empathy is maybe my core guiding principle. But now I'm starting to think maybe it's not. Maybe empathy is like in service to some of those other guiding principles, like wisdom or courage. Maybe the empathy is what makes the wisdom actually wise wisdom, or the courage actually courageous courage. Um, I don't know, because I would have put that at the top of the list for me, or at least second. I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, maybe
Well,
empathy is in service to other principles.
yeah.
I wonder about, back to the family systems conversation. I wonder about what would you say about what a mature empathy would look like? How would we know?
Yeah. Well, in family systems, we define maturity sort of in terms of differentiation of self, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to stand on my own 2 feet, have a clear sense of my own boundaries, principles, values, direction, and purpose, being able to be in relationship to people without being controlled by those relationships, one direction or another. So the way for me that gets worked out is I can be empathetic without caving in,
Mhm.
right, to the sort
Yeah.
of emotional demands or pressures of a group,
Mhm.
um, or distancing from it. Right, my MO is more of a classic distancer, right?
Too.
And we know one of the things that stirs anxiety for people is when we observe the distress of others,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think I wonder if some of the pushback against empathy is just really an unwillingness for us to face the distress of other people.
Mm.
And so for me, that maturity is growing my capacity to be present with somebody who's hurting or
Oh.
suffering.
Okay, look, can I take this a step further? To be present with them, which is, yes, so hard to do. And yes,
No.
the people who are saying that empathy is bad
Yes.
are people who do not seem
Yes.
to be the kinds of
Yes.
people who are capable of being present in someone
That's
else's.
right. Right.
And also being present
Yeah.
and also not buying into maybe the fallacy that because they are distressed, I have to fill in the blank or I can't fill in the blank. In other words, can you set boundaries with someone who is suffering? Well,
Right.
I you know,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
I hold accountable someone who is, up against something really hard? Can I keep the focus on myself and my own responsibility
Mhm.
rather than shifting all my attention and all the attention of the group to the person who is suffering? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
do I just have to do that? The nice or good or pastoral thing to do
Yeah.
is to
Yeah.
focus on the person in pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think maybe
Yeah.
a mature empathy has more choices, right? There's not just one autopilot way of reacting.
Right.
But and then I'm also thinking in terms of differentiation of self. This just occurred to me, but I'm thinking about the differentiation of self scale.
Yeah.
That just being able to distinguish when I'm thinking and when I'm feeling
Mhm.
would be a more mature
Yeah.
form of empathy, and distinguishing that another person's pain does not belong to me.
Yeah.
I may be able to imagine it. I may feel sad with them in my presence with them, but at the
Right.
end of the day, what is happening to them is not happening to me.
Right.
Their emotional state is not mine.
Right. Right. Because I don't want to become responsible for them in a
Yeah.
way that undermines their agency and their
Yeah.
resilience and their capacity to actually, right, solve
Yeah.
problems that they're experiencing, or navigate the challenges that they have. So to be with somebody but not become responsible for them.
Yes. That is so tricky. And what it brings to my mind immediately is just this idea that if I see someone, let's say that I see someone, with a physical need.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to move to help meet that need because that might make them dependent. That's not what we're talking about. A mature empathy could lead to wanting to, from a position of responsibility toward a position of responsibility,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe make some resources available or offer some kind of assistance.
Yeah.
But the important thing is what you said, to not become responsible for them. And that can be tough for those of us whose superpower is exquisite empathy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because sometimes we think,
Yeah.
I think that because I have this ability to see and understand often the perspective and the emotional experience of another person, that then it belongs to me and I need to fix it. And that is immature
Right.
empathy.
Right. 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 To make that an automatic assumption, I
Yeah.
do think along the lines of the leadership idea of empathy, that I can allow the distress of others to register with me in such a way that I do evaluate, do I have a leadership responsibility,
Yeah.
right? Are there conditions in this organization or conditions in this family
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
can have an impact on, right? And if the suffering of others never registers with me,
Mhm.
that's a distancing and cutoff
Mm.
because of an anxious reactivity to their distress.
Right.
But if it overwhelms me, that's
Yeah.
also an anxiety response to their distress, right? So it's always that art of leadership, right? That art of growing up well.
It seems to me that an immature empathy will always lead to burnout. Or I
Yeah,
know we shouldn't say always, but often. I mentioned Brené Brown earlier, and so maybe I'll just come back around and say that in her research, she found that the people who are most mature, by the definition that she was using, are also the most empathetic. But she also found that they were the best at boundaries, that they were the
yeah,
best at what I think I might call
yeah,
personal responsibility.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So to leave it there, I want to invite people who have listened in on our conversation, which was not scripted, by the way, and which we had never had before. So that was fun. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mike. To invite you to think about, how do you define empathy? What does empathy look like in your life? What are the more mature and immature forms of empathy that you might see in yourself or in your organization? And we really want you to help us keep this conversation going. We want to keep talking about this and we want to talk about it with you. So you can get in touch with us on our website or Facebook if you just want to reach out. But you can also register for the Zoom dialogue on October 21st. We'll both be there. We're going to keep talking. We hope other
yeah,
people will show up and talk with us. And you can get the registration for that on the website or in the show notes. So
yeah, yeah,
thank you, Mike, for being
yeah,
here.
yeah. Thank you, Trisha. Appreciate the conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing back from what people are thinking and what the conversation stirs for them. So, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.